Hi guys, here today to do another video for you all for the Suda Cups. I had kind of a busy weekend. Some things came up, so I didn't get to do a video for the past 2 days or so. I don't remember when I did my Three of Cups video, but I did have to put a cat down yesterday, which was kind of a bummer. So needless to say, I've been a little busy. So anywho, so we're going to persevere here and go back to our suit of cups. So we're on the four today, Four of Cups, and this is a card that I've never enjoyed getting this card. Does anyone really like this card? I mean, this card is really quite dull, and it just has a very flat energy about it. Like, it's really middle of the road. It's neither great, it's neither bad. It sort of is just mediocrity, is kind of what the Four of Cups is all about. Mediocrity in terms of happiness. Some people consider it associated with boredom, and I find that is also accurate. You think of course, Pamela Coleman Smith's depiction of this card as the guy, daydreaming underneath the tree, sort of wishing for something that he doesn't have, or just daydreaming in general. So this is a card that is associated with ennui, wishing for things that one doesn't actually have, being sort of discontented with what one has in some way. But let's go through, as I've been doing for most of these. I've been reading the excerpts from the Book of Thoth, and I thought I would do that for this one as well, and sort of break it down for us here. Okay, so we've got this card refers to Chesed in the sphere of water. Of course, this is the fourth Sephirah, Chesed of mercy. Here below the abyss, the energy of this element, although ordered, balanced, and for the moment stabilized, has lost the original purity of the conception. Okay, so essentially here, I find this a little interesting, his interpretation of how quickly water degenerates, considering that water is only 1 degree of separation removed from fire, which is really pure. His whole thing is that water is being the feminine element. It is a little erring on the side of sexist. His interpretation of the whole suit of water, really, to be perfectly honest with you, because he considers it too passive and too inherently unstable to function as well as the more masculine elements, like namely the fire suit, the suit of wands. So basically, technically, though we are in the number 4, which is very stable and balanced, it is still the first step below the abyss, and so this is our first moment that water gets sort of depurified and contaminated a little bit. The card refers to the moon in Cancer, which is her own house, but Cancer itself is so placed that this implies a certain weakness, an abandonment to desire. This tends to introduce the seeds of decay into the fruit of pleasure. Now, I will be very honest with you. I don't know where he's getting that concept, that Cancer itself is so placed that this implies a certain weakness, unless he is considering that Cancer is not in a great place in Chesed, which also doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, because Chesed is Jupiter, and Cancer likes both Jupiter and the moon. So where he's getting this, I don't know. I'll be very honest with you. I don't know. But for whatever reason, he thinks that this has to do with giving oneself up to desire. Sure. The sea is still shown, but its surface is ruffled, and the 4 cups which stand upon it are no longer so stable. The lotus from which the water springs has a multiple stem, as if to show that the influence of the dyad has gathered strength. For although the number 4 is the manifestation and consolidation of the dyad, it is also secretly preparing catastrophe by emphasizing individuality. That's a really interesting paragraph right there. So of course we remember from the Three of Cups how the water that fills all the cups comes from a single lotus, and how he emphasizes that fact in his description of the three, and how that really represents, the unity. And we talked about that in the last video, and how all pleasure is connected to this idea of reunion or reunification into the original whole, which is God. And this is saying that now that we're at the number 4, we have really established ourselves in the material world as separate beings, really as just separate, and that therefore, as soon as you create that separateness, there is less of that concept of union into a seamless whole that you get with more so with the Two of Cups and the Three of Cups, and really the Ace too. I mean, the whole supernal triangle of cups is really about that concept, and this is not about that. The Four of Cups is taking a different path, because now we're in the number 4. And so, yes, secretly preparing catastrophe by emphasizing individuality. And so, in some ways, he is sort of saying that the Four of Cups, I believe, if I am interpreting this correctly, that the Four of Cups is basically a precursor, or is in some ways one of the catalysts for the creation of the sword suit, which is the real emphasizing of individuality that causes catastrophe. Moving on, there is a certain parallelism between this card and the geomantic figures Via and Populus, which are attributed to the moon and her decrease and increase respectively. The link is primarily the change equals stability equation, already familiar to readers of this essay, yes. 4 is an awkward number. Alone among the natural numbers, it is impossible to construct a magic square of 4 cells. Even in the Naples arrangement, 4 is a dead stop, a blind alley. An idea of a totally different order is necessary to carry on the series. Note also the refolding in upon itself suggested by the magic number of 4, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, which is 10. He goes on and on. 4 is the number of the curse of limitation, of restriction. It is the blind and barren cross of equal arms. Tetragrammaton in his fatal aspect of finality, as the Kabbalists knew him before the discovery of the revolving formula, whereby the daughter, seated upon the throne of the mother, awakens the eld of the Allfather. Okay, so there is a bunch of stuff there, and really almost none of it is particularly relevant to understanding the divinatory meanings of this card, but since I like to try to explain as much of it as possible. Of course, geomancy is a different form of divination, and Crowley was all about trying to branch all the different forms of divination and sort of consolidate them in his tarot, which possibly is what makes his tarot so effective, is because it really conglomerates all these different systems and manages to make them work surprisingly well. Now, this whole thing about the number 4 and the whole change equals stability function, I think what he is getting at is that there is an inherent contradiction in this card. That even though when you look at the card on the surface, the card looks to be benign. The moon in Cancer, happy combination. Chesed, benign Sephirah, nothing really crazy going on there. But at its heart, the number 4 does represent a kind of stagnation that is deadly to an element that is already passive and stagnant like water. And in the realm of manifestation, in which we are no longer in that pure ideal world, and we're starting to get this sense of contamination, this is all sort of a brewing recipe for disaster, which is sort of a great explanation for why there are all these, gray kind of storm clouds in the background of Frida Harris's painting of this card. And, the idea that the moon really representing change of stability, fluctuation, fluidity, an organic growth process, really does not jive well or fit in well with the number 4. That those two ideas are clashing in this card. The card being the number 4 naturally wants stability and just structure. The element of Cancer in this location also wants that. The element of water naturally wants that. And the moon, which is not necessarily a particularly It's not a particularly powerful planet because the moon is also kind of passive and feminine. And so basically, this is one large section of text basically saying that this card is too feminine in the sense that it is too passive, not to be read as too womanly. It is simply to be read as too passive. There are too many elements in this card that make it too passive, too stagnant, and really it is, as I said before, a recipe, and as he says before, a recipe for disaster. Yeah, and this whole thing about how 1 + 2 + 3 + 4 is really interesting. You read that often when in texts on tarot about what makes the number 4 the number 4, and they often talk about how the magical square of 4 or whatever it is, the magic number of 4 is 10, meaning that the number 4 is in some ways a precursor number to 10, that 4 and 10 share a lot of similarities because they do represent structure and order and materiality, really, and manifestation. Yeah, and then we get, he loves to throw in this shtick whenever possible about Tetragrammaton and the revolving formula, which of course, really, Tetragrammaton, the formula of Tetragrammaton, I think, is, from his perspective, this whole revolving idea. I think he is really saying that Tetragrammaton, unless you are considering the fifth element of Tetragrammaton, which he does not really mention here, but I think he's getting at, without that fifth element, the Sheen element that creates the name Yeshua, which is of course Jesus, without that spirit to keep things moving and revolving, the formula of Tetragrammaton being associated with the number 4 is very rigid and very just stuck, and it doesn't necessarily represent organic creation. And then this is when we get this whole idea of the demiurge and Gnostic ideas of how the demiurge is evil and created matter to perpetuate ignorance and all this goofy stuff, and that the number 5 is necessary in order to destroy that and break us out of that regimentation so that we can see truth, basically. So there's a lot of extra stuff that he decided to throw in here. Really, what the card means is what I said before, is really boredom, ennui. It's a sense of heaviness. It's a sense of feeling like things are good, things are okay, but they aren't necessarily great. You are still looking for or searching for something else. It can represent lethargy too, just this really passive sense. There's a restlessness in this card, I think, which is also what he's sort of getting at too. That clash of the lunar energy with the energy of 4. There's this restlessness to it, which also, is represented in her picture with the waves sort of slowly starting to stir up there and pick up. She's representing that there for us pretty clearly. And yeah, I think, she did a really nice job of depicting this card, especially, even just the fact that these cups do not overflow. Unlike all the other cups we've seen thus far, there's always this overflowing in the Supernal Triad. In the 4 of Cups, there's no overflow at all, because that would imply not so much containing. And this card is all about containment and structure and manifestation and a system, a closed-off system. And in this case, there is no spilling out into the universe, generally speaking. It's just in its own little sphere. It's almost like a personal happiness that being kept to oneself, sort of like the 4 of Discs, actually, in that same sort of way, without being shared with other people, it becomes stagnant and pointless and a waste of energy. And boring. It becomes boring and, yeah, just a big old waste of time. So I hope that clears that card up for you. And if you have any questions, let me know. And glad you guys are still liking the videos, and I'm happy that they're helping. All right, so hopefully tomorrow I'll get around to the 5 of Cups. Thanks, and have a happy Memorial Day to all my fellow Americans. Bye.